This is what you are. Nothing more than a mistake I made. You are too black to fit in our society. You really think you belong here? People like you serve, they don't sit with us.
Be careful, she might spill something on her uniform.
I divorce her because of you, my love, and she is too much annoying and very poor to stand with me. She'll come. People like her always come when they're invited by people like me.
One day we will realize my worth, but that's too late. I love you so much. Why was I not enough for you?
You really showed up wearing that? How embarrassing. Funny, I thought embarrassment was speaking before understanding truth.
How dare you show your face here? Get out! I can't believe this is happening.
Make sure she gets an apron. The room exploded with laughter. Ethan Walker leaned back in his leather chair, swirling expensive champagne inside a crystal glass, while his fiancée, Victoria Hayes, nearly fell against him laughing. Around the private lounge sat some of the wealthiest people in New York, investors, socialites, CEOs, and celebrities who treated cruelty like a personality trait and arrogance like a sign of success. Victoria wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. "Stop it, you're joking." "I'm not," Ethan replied with a grin. He picked up the ivory wedding invitation resting on the marble table and tapped it lightly. "She spent years cleaning up my messes. It's only fair she helps one last time." More laughter. A businessman sitting across from him shook his head in amusement. "You actually invited your ex-wife to your wedding?" "Of course." "Why?" Ethan smirked. "Because I want her to see what she lost." Nobody noticed the wedding coordinator standing near the doorway suddenly lowering her eyes. Nobody noticed the uncomfortable expression on her face. Because unlike everyone else in the room, she knew something they didn't. The luxury hotel, where the wedding would take place, had recently changed ownership. Very quietly, very secretly. The new owner preferred privacy. No interviews, no public appearances, no photographs. Most people had never even seen her face, and the name on the ownership documents was one Ethan Walker had not heard in 3 years. Ava Johnson, the same woman he was laughing about, the same woman he believed was still broken, the same woman he planned to humiliate one final time. 3 years earlier, Ava Johnson sat alone in the enormous kitchen of Ethan's penthouse, staring at a birthday cake she had baked herself. The candles had already melted. The frosting had started drying around the edges. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered beneath a cold winter sky. Inside, silence filled the apartment. The clock read 1:43 a.m. Ethan was still not home. Again. Ava checked her phone. No messages, no calls, nothing. She knew where he was. The entire internet knew where he was. Photos from a luxury nightclub had been circulating for hours. Ethan drinking with models, Ethan laughing with influencers, Ethan leaving with Victoria Hayes. Victoria. The woman Ethan insisted was just a friend. Ava stared at one photograph for several seconds before locking her screen. Then she smiled sadly. Not because she believed his lies, because she remembered a different version of him, a version that once existed. A version that loved her. 10 years earlier, Ethan had nothing. No penthouse, no luxury cars, no company worth billions, no investors chasing him. He lived in a tiny apartment above a grocery store where the heating barely worked during winter. The furniture came from garage sales. The refrigerator was usually empty. Some months they survived on instant noodles. Some months even those felt expensive. Back then, Ava worked 2 jobs, one during the day, one at night, sometimes 18 hours straight. Not because she had to, because Ethan had a dream. And she believed in it more than he did. She remembered one night especially. Rain hammered against the apartment windows while Ethan sat at the kitchen table staring at rejection emails. Another investor had declined, then another, then another. His company account contained less than $200. He looked defeated, broken, ready to quit. "I'm done," he whispered. Ava looked up from her laptop. "What?" "I'm done pretending this is going to work." "Ethan." "No." He rubbed both hands across his face. "I'm tired." "I know." "No, you don't." His voice cracked. "Everyone thinks I'm a failure." Ava stood from her chair, walked around the table, then placed her savings account book directly in front of him. Ethan frowned. "What's this?" "My savings." His eyes widened. "Ava, take it." "No." "Yes. You've been saving for years." "We're saving for years." His throat tightened. "Ava, I can't take this." "You can," she smiled softly. "Because one day when you succeed, we'll laugh about this moment." Ethan stared at her. Then tears filled his eyes. He pulled her into his arms, and for a long time neither of them spoke. Back then he loved her openly, fearlessly. Back then he introduced her proudly, held her hand in public, talked about their future constantly. When his company finally secured its first major investment, Ethan cried harder than she did. The first thing he bought wasn't a watch, wasn't a suit, wasn't a car. It was a ring, a simple diamond ring he could barely afford. He proposed on the rooftop of their apartment building beneath a sky full of stars. "You believed in me before anyone else," he told her, "and I'll spend the rest of my life proving you were right." Ava said yes before he finished speaking. At the time, she believed promises lasted forever. She had no idea success would change him. The transformation happened slowly, so slowly she almost missed it. The first $1 million changed his schedule. The first 10 million changed his friends. The first 100 million changed his personality. Suddenly, wealthy people surrounded him everywhere. Executives, celebrities, models, socialites, people who judged worth by appearance and status, people who looked at Ava's dark skin and humble background as if they were flaws. At first, Ethan defended her. Then he stayed quiet. Then he laughed along. That was when the real damage began. "A little makeover wouldn't hurt. You should straighten your hair. You need more sophisticated clothes. You should learn how high society works." Small comments, tiny cuts. But thousands of tiny cuts can bleed a person dry. Ava tried changing. She tried new hairstyles, new dresses, new makeup, new manners. Nothing worked, because the problem was never her. The problem was that Ethan had become desperate for acceptance. And cowardly men will sacrifice loyal people to impress shallow ones. The night everything finally broke happened at Ethan's 35th birthday gala. 500 guests attended. The event occupied an entire luxury ballroom. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings. Champagne flowed endlessly. Camera flashes exploded everywhere. Ava spent weeks organizing every detail personally. She wanted everything perfect. For him. When the evening began, Ethan smiled proudly beside her. For 20 minutes. Then Victoria Hayes arrived. The room changed instantly. Victoria was beautiful, tall, blonde, effortlessly glamorous, the type of woman magazines adored, the type of woman wealthy men bragged about dating. She walked directly toward Ethan, ignored Ava completely, then kissed Ethan's cheek. Not inappropriate enough to cause a scene, just intimate enough to make a statement. Guests noticed. Whispers started immediately. Ava felt humiliation crawl beneath her skin. Later she found Ethan and Victoria laughing together near the balcony. "Too close, too comfortable, too familiar. Can we talk?" Ava asked quietly. Victoria rolled her eyes. "Relax." Ethan sighed heavily. "Not now." It's important. Everything is important with you. The word struck harder than he intended, or perhaps exactly as hard as he intended. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Victoria smirked. You know what Ethan needs? Ava stared at her. What? A woman who belongs in his world. Silence. Ava waited. Waited for Ethan to defend her. Waited for her husband. Waited for the man she sacrificed everything for. Instead, Ethan lifted his champagne glass and laughed. That laugh destroyed something inside her forever. Because betrayal hurts most when it arrives wearing a familiar face. A week later, Ava left. No screaming, no dramatic confrontation, no begging. She packed 2 suitcases, left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter, and disappeared. Ethan expected tears, expected apologies, expected her to return. Instead, she vanished completely. For months, he barely thought about her. Then months became years. And during those years, he built more wealth, dated more women, bought bigger houses, collected more awards. Yet somehow his happiness never grew. What he didn't know was that while he was chasing attention, Ava was quietly building something far more powerful, something that would change everything. And now, 3 years later, he sat laughing with his friends while holding a wedding invitation addressed to the woman he believed had lost everything. The woman he planned to humiliate one final time. The woman he intended to hand an apron. The woman he thought would arrive embarrassed and defeated. He had absolutely no idea that Ava Johnson had just become one of the youngest luxury hotel owners in America, and the hotel hosting his wedding already belonged to her. The envelope arrived on a quiet afternoon. Ava Johnson was standing in the glass-walled office of her Manhattan hotel headquarters, reviewing renovation plans for a new luxury property in Dubai, when her assistant placed the ivory invitation on the table without saying a word. For a moment, Ava didn't react. She simply stared at it as if it were something distant from her present life, something that no longer belonged to her reality. Then she slowly reached out and picked it up. The paper was expensive, thick, embossed in gold lettering, the kind of invitation that screamed wealth and arrogance before a single word was even read. She opened it calmly, her expression unchanged, her dark eyes scanning the text with quiet precision until she reached the name at the bottom. Ethan Walker and Victoria Hayes. A faint silence filled the room. The assistant watching her hesitated, unsure whether to speak, but Ava raised her hand slightly, signaling that she was fine. And surprisingly, she was. There was no trembling, no rush of painful memories, no emotional collapse like the kind people often expected from women who had been deeply hurt in the past. Instead, there was stillness, the kind of stillness that only comes after pain has already burned through every remaining weakness. Slowly, Ava placed the invitation back on the table and turned toward the glass window overlooking Manhattan. The city stretched endlessly beneath her, glowing in the late afternoon light like a living empire. She remembered a different version of herself standing in this same city years ago, tired, overworked, unseen, holding on to love like it was something sacred. Back then she would have cried after reading this invitation. Back then she would have wondered why she wasn't enough. Back then she would have broken quietly in private so no one could see the cracks. But that woman no longer existed. He's getting married, her assistant said softly, carefully observing her expression. Ava nodded once. Yes. The assistant hesitated again. Do you want me to decline it? For a long moment, Ava said nothing. Then she slowly turned back toward the table, picked up the invitation again and studied Ethan's name as if seeing it for the first time in years. Not with love. Not with anger, but with understanding, because sometimes clarity hurts more than heartbreak ever did. No, Ava finally said quietly. I'll attend. The assistant blinked in surprise. You will? Ava's lips curved slightly, not into a smile of happiness, but something far more controlled. Something intentional. Yes, she said. After all, I've been invited. And just like that, the decision was made. Not emotionally, not impulsively, but with the calm precision of someone who had already outgrown the life that once destroyed her. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan Walker was standing in front of a mirror inside his penthouse suite, adjusting his tuxedo with visible irritation. Victoria Hayes entered the room wearing a silk robe, scrolling through her phone while barely acknowledging him. "Did the invitations go out?" she asked lazily. "Yes," Ethan replied. "Including her?" Victoria finally looked up. A slow, amused smile appeared on her face. "You actually invited her?" Ethan shrugged. "Why not?" Victoria walked closer, circling him slowly like she was inspecting something she already owned. "You're really going to make her watch this?" Ethan's reflection in the mirror flickered slightly as he smiled. "She deserves closure." Victoria laughed softly. "No, Ethan," she said. "She deserves humiliation." He didn't correct her. And that silence again, small, careless, familiar, became the same kind of poison it had been years ago. Because Ethan Walker didn't realize that what he called confidence was actually arrogance, and what he called closure was just cruelty disguised as pride. He had convinced himself that Ava would arrive broken, quiet, and unchanged. The same woman who once cried in silence. The same woman who accepted disrespect because she believed love required patience. He didn't know that silence had once been her survival mechanism. And survival always evolves. The wedding venue was prepared at one of the most exclusive luxury hotels in New York, a place reserved for politicians, celebrities, and global elites. Chandeliers hung like frozen stars above marble floors polished to perfection. Every corner of the ballroom was filled with white roses and gold detailing, designed to reflect wealth in every possible direction. The entire space felt less like a wedding and more like a performance of status. Ethan wanted it that way. He wanted everything perfect. He wanted everyone to witness his success, and most importantly, he wanted Ava to witness what she had lost. As guests began arriving days before the ceremony for pre-wedding events, conversations about Ethan and Victoria filled every space. People admired them, envied them, praised them. And somewhere beneath all that noise, Ethan stood smiling, unaware that his entire narrative was about to shift in ways he could never control again. Because while he was preparing a wedding meant to display dominance, Ava Johnson was preparing something else entirely. Not revenge, not anger, not desperation. Something far more dangerous than all three. Preparation, and preparation, when done by someone who has already survived destruction, does not create noise. It creates inevitability. The night before the rehearsal dinner, Ethan received a call from the hotel management confirming final arrangements. "Everything is ready, sir," the voice said politely. Ethan nodded even though no one could see him. "Good, make sure everything is perfect." "Of course," the voice replied. There was a brief pause before the manager added, "Also, there has been a change in ownership records recently." Ethan frowned. "What change?" Another pause. "Nothing that affects your booking." Ethan shrugged and ended the call without further thought. Somewhere in the same building, deep within the executive offices no guest ever saw, Ava Johnson signed the final document confirming full operational control of the hotel for the entire wedding weekend. Her expression never changed as the ink dried. No excitement. No satisfaction. Only certainty. Because while Ethan was planning a celebration of his future, he was unknowingly stepping into a space that already belonged to the woman he discarded. And she had not come to interrupt his wedding. She had come to attend it. As its silent owner, the morning of the rehearsal dinner arrived with perfect clarity, as if the sky itself had decided to remain silent out of respect for what was about to unfold. Ethan Walker stood inside the grand ballroom of the hotel, overseeing final arrangements with the satisfaction of a man who believed everything in his life was under control. Waiters moved in synchronized precision. Chandeliers sparkled like suspended galaxies, and every table was decorated with white roses arranged to perfection. To Ethan, it all felt like success made visible. He adjusted his cufflinks and glanced around with a faint smile, already imagining the admiration, the envy, the respect. Victoria Hayes entered the ballroom shortly after, wearing a sleek ivory dress that hugged her figure perfectly, her phone already in her hand as she recorded short clips for her social media. "This place is insane," she said with a satisfied smile. "I know," Ethan replied. "I chose it myself." Victoria laughed lightly, looping her arm through his. "No, darling. You paid for it. Someone else designed it." Ethan smirked but didn't argue because he liked when she teased him like that. It made him feel powerful and desired at the same time. What neither of them noticed was the quiet shift happening behind the scenes. Staff members no longer responded to Ethan's instructions with the same urgency. Some conversations stopped abruptly when he entered a room. A few exchanged glances that he couldn't interpret. Subtle changes, almost invisible. But Ava Johnson had always believed that real power never announces itself loudly. It replaces things quietly until no one remembers what came before. Somewhere above the ballroom, inside a private executive office, Ava stood alone in front of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She was dressed simply in a tailored black suit, her hair pulled back neatly, her expression unreadable. On the table behind her lay multiple documents, ownership transfers, operational authority confirmations, and financial restructuring agreements. Everything finalized, everything legal, everything invisible to those who didn't know where to look. Her assistant entered quietly. "Everything is in place," she said. Ava didn't turn around. "And the guest list?" The assistant hesitated slightly. "He's still expecting you as a guest." A faint pause filled the room. Ava finally turned her head slightly, her gaze calm. "Good," she said. "Let him." Downstairs, Ethan was walking through the ballroom with the hotel manager beside him, reviewing final details for the rehearsal dinner. "The lighting will dim at 7, the manager explained. "Live music begins at 7:30. The private dining area has been reserved exactly as requested." Ethan nodded approvingly. "Good. I want everything flawless." The manager hesitated for half a second before speaking again. "Of course, sir. Also, just to confirm, all operational approvals for this weekend now fall under executive authorization." Ethan barely paid attention. "Fine, whatever you need to keep it perfect." The manager nodded but said nothing more, because Ethan didn't understand what that sentence actually meant. He thought he was speaking to staff. He didn't realize he was speaking inside someone else's structure now. That evening, the rehearsal dinner began exactly as planned. Guests filled the private hall with laughter, champagne, and soft music. Victoria sat at the center of attention, enjoying every second of admiration, while Ethan moved confidently through the room like a man who believed he had already won at life. And then, just before the speeches began, the atmosphere subtly shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for sensitive people to notice first. The doors at the far end of the hall opened. A quiet pause spread through the room, not fear, not shock, curiosity. Ethan turned slightly, expecting a guest running late or a staff member entering by mistake. But then she stepped in. Ava Johnson. The room didn't react immediately, because for a few seconds people simply didn't recognize her as the same category of person they expected to see. She wasn't dressed for attention. No glittering gown. No dramatic entrance. Just a black tailored dress, minimal makeup, and a calm expression that didn't ask for permission to exist in the space. Ethan's hand froze mid-gesture. Victoria noticed his silence and followed his gaze. "Who is that?" she whispered. Ethan didn't answer immediately, because something in his mind was struggling to connect memory with reality. Ava looked different. Not because she had changed dramatically on the surface, but because something inside her had shifted in a way he had never seen before. The hesitation, the softness, the silent acceptance he once knew, gone, replaced by something controlled, steady, final. She walked forward slowly, not rushing, not performing, simply moving, as if the room belonged to her as much as anyone else inside it. And in a way it did, because ownership does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply exists. Ethan finally spoke, his voice uncertain. "Ava?" The name sounded foreign in his mouth, like a word he hadn't used in years and suddenly didn't know how to pronounce correctly. She stopped a few steps away from him. Her eyes met his, calm, clear, no anger, no sadness, just recognition without emotion. "Hello, Ethan," she said softly. That was all. No shaking voice, no visible pain, no hesitation. And somehow that calmness disturbed him more than rage ever could. Victoria stepped closer, scanning Ava up and down with visible judgment. "Oh," she said slowly. "You actually came." Ava shifted her gaze briefly toward her. "I was invited." Victoria smiled thinly. "Well, I suppose someone had to see the wedding before cleaning it up." A few guests laughed quietly. Ethan didn't correct her immediately. And that pause, just like before, was enough. Ava looked at Ethan now. Not Victoria, just him. "Interesting," she said quietly. "You still let other people speak for you." Ethan frowned slightly. What does that mean? Ava tilted her head just a little. It means some things never change. The air between them tightened, though neither raised their voice. Something unspoken moved beneath the surface. History, memory, regret. But Ava didn't dwell in it. She had outgrown it. Instead, she glanced around the room briefly, observing the setting, the guests, the energy. Then she nodded once. The venue looks beautiful, she said. You chose well. Ethan blinked. That wasn't the reaction he expected. You're not going to say anything else? He asked. Ava looked back at him. About what? A pause. Ethan struggled to find words. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind for years. Her arrival, her reaction, her humiliation. But reality wasn't cooperating. About us, he finally said. Ava studied him for a long second. Then she replied softly, There is no us, Ethan. And with that single sentence, something inside the room shifted permanently. Not loudly, not visibly, but deeply. Because Ethan Walker suddenly realized, standing in the middle of his perfect rehearsal dinner, that the woman he once defined as his past was no longer emotionally reachable, not angry enough to fight, not sad enough to break, just gone beyond him, and that realization was the first crack in everything he thought he controlled. The rehearsal dinner continued after that moment, but something fundamental had already broken inside the atmosphere. Conversations resumed, glasses clinked, soft music played again, but it no longer felt seamless. It felt forced, like the room itself was pretending nothing had happened. Ethan Walker kept glancing at Ava across the hall, unable to fully understand why her presence unsettled him so much. She wasn't doing anything provocative. She wasn't speaking loudly or drawing attention. She was simply there, calm, composed, distant in a way that made her feel untouchable. Victoria noticed his distraction immediately. You're staring, she whispered under her breath, tightening her grip on his arm. Ethan blinked and looked away. I'm not. You are, she said sharply. She's just your ex-wife, Ethan. He didn't respond because even saying the word just felt wrong now. Ava wasn't standing where she used to stand in his memory. She wasn't the woman he once dismissed. She wasn't the broken version of her past self he expected to see. Something about her had changed in a way that didn't ask for validation anymore. Meanwhile, Ava stood near the edge of the ballroom speaking briefly with one of the senior event coordinators. Her tone was polite, controlled, businesslike. The service timing needs to be adjusted by 10 minutes, she said calmly. The coordinator nodded immediately. Of course, Miss Johnson. Ethan happened to hear that last part from across the room. Miss Johnson. He frowned slightly. Something about the way staff responded to her felt different. Not casual, not familiar, respectful. Too respectful for a guest. He turned to one of the hotel managers standing nearby. Why are they calling her Miss Johnson, he asked. The manager hesitated for half a second before replying carefully. That is her name, sir. Ethan exhaled lightly, dismissing it. Right, anyway, make sure everything is ready for tomorrow. Everything is already prepared, the manager said quietly. There was a pause before he added, as per ownership protocol. Ethan frowned again. Ownership protocol? The manager didn't elaborate. Instead, he simply nodded and walked away. Ethan dismissed it as corporate formality and turned his attention back to Victoria, who was now laughing with a group of guests, as if she had already claimed ownership of the entire evening. But Ava was no longer standing still. She was moving through the room now, not aimlessly but deliberately, speaking with staff, checking notes, reviewing details with calm authority. It wasn't obvious to most guests, but to anyone paying attention, she wasn't behaving like someone attending a wedding. She was behaving like someone ensuring an operation ran correctly. Ethan noticed it again when a senior staff member paused mid-task and waited for her approval before proceeding. Not him, her. Why is she giving instructions to my wedding planners? Ethan muttered under his breath. Victoria glanced over. Maybe she thinks she's still involved in your life. Ethan frowned. She isn't. Then ignore her, Victoria said simply. But ignoring her was becoming harder, because every time Ethan looked at Ava, she seemed further away from the version of her he remembered. Not physically, emotionally. She wasn't reacting to him anymore, not even when he spoke. That realization began to irritate him in a way he didn't fully understand yet. Finally, during a short pause in the event, Ethan approached her. Ava was standing near a marble pillar reviewing a tablet, her expression focused. He stopped a few feet away. Ava, she looked up slowly. Yes, just that. No tension. No anticipation. Ethan hesitated for a second before speaking. You've been talking to my staff. Ava blinked once, calm. Your staff? Ethan narrowed his eyes slightly. This is my wedding weekend. Ava nodded lightly. I'm aware. So why are you giving instructions? A brief silence. Then Ava closed the tablet gently. Because they are relevant. Ethan let out a small breath of frustration. You're a guest. Ava studied him for a moment. Not offended. Not defensive. Just observing. Is that what you believe? She asked softly. Ethan paused. What? Ava tilted her head slightly. That I am only a guest here? The question lingered in the air. Ethan felt something shift again, subtle, unsettling. Ava, don't start something, he said quietly. She almost smiled at that. Not warmly. Not bitterly. Just knowingly. Start something? She repeated. Ethan, I didn't start anything. Then she looked around the ballroom again, her gaze steady. I'm simply making sure everything runs the way it should. Victoria approached from behind Ethan at that moment, looping her arm possessively through his. If you have something to say, Victoria said coldly to Ava, say it quickly. We're very busy. Ava looked at her briefly, then back at Ethan. Busy, she repeated softly. Ethan felt irritation rising now. Ava, stop this. Ava met his eyes directly. Stop what? Acting like you belong here. A pause. That sentence hung in the air longer than it should have. Guests nearby started noticing the tension again. Ava didn't react immediately. She simply studied him for a long moment, as if evaluating something that no longer required emotional investment. Then she spoke quietly. I don't act like I belong here, Ethan. Another pause. I simply do. Ethan frowned. What does that even mean? Ava turned slightly, gesturing lightly toward the room. It means I don't need permission to exist in spaces I already own. The silence that followed was different this time. Heavier. Not everyone understood the implication, but the staff nearby did. A few exchanged glances. Victoria stiffened slightly, sensing something she couldn't identify. Ethan, however, only felt confusion turning into frustration. Own? He repeated. Ava looked back at him calmly. Yes. Ethan gave a short, disbelieving laugh. This is a wedding venue, Ava, not your fantasy. Ava didn't respond immediately. Instead, she simply looked at him one last time, steady, distant, final. Then she said softly, Then you should ask your management about the ownership update filed 3 days ago. The words landed quietly, but they didn't need volume. Because somewhere across the room, a senior executive had just stopped speaking mid-conversation. And for the first time that evening, Ethan Walker felt something unfamiliar rise inside him. Not anger, not confidence, but uncertainty. And uncertainty for a man like him was far more dangerous than humiliation. The ballroom felt different before anyone even realized why. It wasn't louder or quieter. It was simply more aware, like the air itself had started paying attention. Ethan Walker stood still for a moment after Ava's last words, trying to process what she had said. Ownership update. 3 days ago. His mind rejected it immediately as irrelevant, as misunderstanding as something that couldn't possibly matter in his world. Because in Ethan's world, he was always the center of final decisions, always the one in control, always the one who understood the structure of power. But Ava Johnson was no longer looking at him like someone she needed to convince. She had already moved past that stage of her life. Victoria, sensing Ethan's silence, tightened her grip on his arm. Ethan, she whispered sharply, what is she talking about? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes followed Ava as she turned away from them and walked calmly toward the staff area again, as if the conversation had already ended for her. That bothered him more than anything she had said. Because people who were guilty argued. People who were weak explained. People who were desperate tried to be understood. Ava did none of those things. She simply continued existing as if his confusion no longer required her participation. Ava, Ethan called out louder this time. She stopped but didn't turn immediately. That small pause alone shifted the atmosphere again. Then she looked back over her shoulder. Yes? Ethan walked a few steps closer, lowering his voice. What did you mean by ownership update? Ava studied him for a moment as if deciding how much truth he was capable of handling. Then she replied evenly, exactly what it sounds like. A silence followed. Victoria laughed lightly, though it sounded forced. This is ridiculous, but no one joined her. Not this time, because staff members were no longer pretending they hadn't heard, and a few executives standing near the banquet entrance had gone unusually still. Ethan finally turned toward the hotel manager, who had been standing nearby all evening. Explain, he said sharply. The manager hesitated. Then he stepped forward carefully. Sir, he began. 3 days ago, the ownership of this property was transferred under a holding structure currently registered under private executive control. Ethan frowned. And? The manager swallowed. And that entity is authorized to override operational decisions for this entire weekend. Victoria scoffed. That doesn't answer anything. But Ethan wasn't looking at her anymore. Who owns it? He asked quietly. The manager paused. Then carefully he said it. Ava Johnson. The world didn't explode. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no flashing lights, no sudden music shift, no cinematic silence. Instead, something far more unsettling occurred. The room simply redefined itself around that information. Ethan blinked once. Then again. That's not possible, he said immediately. The manager shook his head. It is legally registered and fully active. Ethan turned slowly toward Ava. You're lying. Ava didn't react to the accusation. She simply looked at him calmly. Why would I need to? Victoria's voice rose slightly. This is some kind of joke, right? No one answered her. Because staff were no longer looking at Ethan. They were looking at Ava. Not nervously. Not confusedly. Respectfully. That was when Ethan finally noticed it. The shift he had ignored all evening. Instructions weren't coming from him anymore. They never really had been tonight. Ava had been quietly adjusting, correcting, and guiding operations without ever raising her voice. And everyone had followed, not because she asked, but because they already knew. Ethan's throat tightened slightly. You planned this, he said, his voice lower now. Ava tilted her head. Planned what? This, all of it, a pause. Then Ava stepped forward just slightly, closing the distance between them for the first time that night. Ethan, she said quietly, you are not important enough for me to plan my life around anymore. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Victoria stepped forward now, anger breaking through confusion. You think you can just walk in here and... Ava looked at her briefly. Just briefly. And Victoria stopped speaking mid-sentence. Not because she was intimidated by tone, but because something in Ava's presence made continuation feel unnecessary. Ava turned back to Ethan. You invited me here to humiliate me, she said calmly. Yes. Ethan didn't deny it. Ava nodded once. I know. That was it. No emotional reaction. No pain, no anger. Just acknowledgement. Then she continued. The difference is, you assumed I was still the same person who needed your approval to survive it. A silence followed. Ethan's jaw tightened. And what are you now? He asked. Ava didn't hesitate. Someone who doesn't. That answer should have been simple, but it wasn't. Because Ethan suddenly realized the truth he had been avoiding since the moment she walked in. She hadn't come here to reclaim anything from him. Not love, not validation, not revenge. She had already moved beyond all three. Victoria stepped closer to Ethan again, her voice lower now. We should end this, she muttered. But Ethan didn't move, because for the first time in his life, he didn't know how to end something he no longer controlled. Ava glanced around the ballroom once more, then back at him. Enjoy your wedding, she said calmly, a pause. Everything is already prepared. Ethan frowned slightly. Prepared for what? Ava's expression didn't change. For tomorrow. Then she turned away from him completely and walked toward the exit doors, her step steady, unhurried, final. No anger, no drama, no backward glance. And somehow that made it worse. Because Ethan Walker stood in the center of a luxury ballroom he believed he owned emotionally, socially, and structurally, realizing for the first time that the most important person in the room had never been him. Victoria finally spoke again, but her voice sounded smaller now. Ethan, what just happened? He didn't answer immediately. His eyes were still fixed on the doors where Ava had disappeared. Because deep down he already understood something he didn't want to accept. This wedding was no longer his event. It had become something else entirely. A stage for a truth he had ignored too long. And Ava Johnson was not his past walking back into his life. She was the person who had already rewritten his future without asking permission.